Hello and welcome to Climate Matters. I'm Edie Lush. I'm delighted to be your host for the next hour today. Welcome to our live TV audience here in the Taj Exotica in Dubai, and also welcome to those watching around the world. If you'd like to join in the conversation, you can use IGF updates and do tag us IGF UAE. So our purpose today is accelerating towards net zero. The reality is, of course, that the world is moving too slowly to curb carbon emissions. And if we don't pick up the pace, the result will be temperature increases beyond what we can absorb. More extreme weather events, shifts in agricultural patterns, and millions of climate refugees. So the situation is dire, but actually it's not entirely hopeless. We know what to do. We know that it isn't just one thing. In fact, there's no silver bullet to avert climate disaster, but there is silver buckshot, a series of steps that will help us get to net zero carbon emissions. Can we take these steps clearly enough? That is on us. Now, here to guide us through the path to net zero is the former senior energy advisor to the UK Prime Minister and the founder of a group called Zeroism. Anouka Dhadda, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Edie.
I've put some glue on your seat, so you're not allowed to leave for the next hour. Now, we have a lot to cover and an hour to do it, but along the way, we're going to bring in some other experts to help us, advocates to go deep into the issues like decarbonizing mobility and food. But I want to start with the big picture. So I'd love for you to summarize for us where the world stands on getting climate change under control.
Well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to having myself unglued at some point. But there you go. I think my answer is probably two words of cautious optimism. It's a big transformation that we have ahead of us. It's the whole of the economy, the whole of the world. But we also know that, we as humans are natural innovators, right? So, look at the space race, look at the internet, even look at the fact that I'm opposite you physically here today without a mask, and can sit this close to you. Although actually it might be about 2 meters, so maybe it didn't quite work. But, actually we have innovated our way, used technology, and are able to kind of tackle these big issues. And we have the International Energy Agency saying actually peak kind of fossil fuels within a decade. So I think all of those indicators say there's still a lot to do, but we're getting into a good position, I would say. COP27 did show the other side, hence why it's cautiously optimistic. It's not all going to be mitigation. So there's two parts to this, right? Mitigation being reducing our emissions, so the stuff that we'll come on to talk about. But we also have to adapt because we are seeing the effects, as you pointed out, of temperature rises, etc. It is hitting those kind of small island states, etc., harder than we can probably acknowledge sat here in this beautiful weather right now. But adaptation is probably a really key part of why we also have to ensure that kind of cautiousness remains. But I mean, let's look at fusion, for example.
Well, exactly. We had some incredible news, didn't we? We had some incredible news on nuclear fusion coming from my home state, actually just around the corner from where I live, Lawrence Livermore Lab. And a real breakthrough in terms of but it's still quite far away, but it's exciting, right?
Totally. But I think if you want an example of that cautious optimism, there's a joke certainly in energy circles, which is fusion is always 30 years away. But I think this week's breakthrough means it actually genuinely might be. And I think that's quite important, and hopefully sooner. But and I think this is kind of all really good proof points as to how we are kind of making progress. We could always be faster, but we do also need to take our populations with us, right? And we can go on to talk about that.
Well, first of all, give COP27 a grade from A to F in terms of ability to save the world. How did COP27 do?
Well, did you know the UK system now doesn't do A to S? So I think that means I
1 to
get
9.
out of this.
1 to 9.
Because as someone who did have to do the UK's COP 26, I can tell you it is no mean feat, not least the logistics of it, which, you know, there was a great team working on it, but actually driving consensus across, you know, over 190 parties is tough. So I think, you know, getting to consensus at the end of 2 weeks is always a tough but good job. So I think, you know, in the same sense, I'd say cautiously optimistic. There's always more you can do, but actually I think it sets up this year's COP in the UAE actually really, really well.
So what is Zeroism, and what are you proposing in particular?
So Zeroism is a company that I set up this year. So having left Number 10 with 2 co-founders of mine, Allegra Stratton, also a colleague from Number 10, our COP 26 spokeswoman, and Faraz Agai from a creative agency called Founders Makers. And the kind of driving philosophy of that is, well, actually, we want to focus on the economic opportunities of this transition. There's a lot that can be said else, you know, otherwise, which is just stop doing everything. We need to do this faster, harder. But actually, this pro-tech, pro-innovation approach is actually really part of what we want to do. So we essentially offer advice to those companies that are thinking, this is a huge problem, but I don't know how to solve it. Because yes, it's really complex, but the thing that I learned from my time in government and in the Prime Minister's office in particular is there's also a few places where it is really worth putting your strategic bets on, because that is where you might make the most gains. So I wouldn't say the 10-point plan is there are just 10 steps and that's all you need to do, but actually it says, let's distill this really hard problem into 10 things or 10 areas, and then have a really good go at delivering that and measuring our delivery. So I would kind of sum up by saying...
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so the model is bringing together that policy and strategy bit with the delivery bit, and then also communicating it in a way that engages people.
Okay, so first of all, why net zero? Why not just say no to carbon, zero emissions?
So carbon is part of it, right? So just to kind of explain for those who don't know, greenhouse gases are the problem that we're trying to tackle, and carbon is the kind of majority of it. It's about 3/4, but also it stays around in the atmosphere for longer. Methane is actually also quite a large contributor as well, and we'll come on to talk about, I think hopefully with some guests, about kind of agriculture, which is a large driver there. But for me, it's the net of net zero that is really important. So what that means is this is a balancing act, right? So you must kind of, or we should be trying to both reduce our emissions through taking steps that we can and through innovating, and we'll have some great people, I'm sure, who will tell us about all the things they're doing, but also being able to I'm going to use the offset word, which gets quite a lot of controversy in climate
Raised
land.
eyebrows, concerned faces.
Indeed, but credibly kind of offsetting, again, through technology. But the third point I would kind of make is actually this whole approach is because you need to take people with you. So having come from a background in government and politics, that is kind of really key to this. This stuff is big. This stuff is about people's lives. And I don't think you can do it to them. You need to do it with them.
I think it's a really important point. And actually, when I look at your 10 steps and just taking, you know, advancing offshore wind, for example, cleaner power, that's one of those things that you got to bring people with you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Tell us what the 10 steps are and break them into manageable packets.
All right, excellent. It feels like I'm sitting a test.
I've got my 1 to 9 out here. Anouka.
Excellent. All right, you can tell me where I go wrong, but my memory is not as good as it used to be. But look, I think full credit to the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He actually kind of, in the midst of the pandemic, did recognise that a green recovery was really part of what we needed to do to actually kind of grow as an economy. And that was kind of the genesis for it. So to explain kind of how we split it up, I think it's easy to say there are kind of 3 packets of stuff, right? So one, you produce clean energy. So that's wind, nuclear,
Hydrogen. Yeah.
Thanks. Two, you utilize that clean energy into products that make people's lives easier, better, cheaper, faster. And then three, you capture the remaining emissions that you haven't got through your package 1 and 2, through new industries and through nature. So that's the kind of bits within it. And, you know, as we say, under clean energy, you've got the three we've just mentioned. You've also got, then when you're using it, this is like you're going into EVs, this is making your buildings more efficient. This is cleaning up your transport so people can fly and drive, but...
Take ships, send their goods around the world.
Exactly. But then you've still got this bit that, you know, what do you do with it? Well, you can use carbon capture.
Something that's a really big issue here in this area. Some of the oil producing states very strong on carbon capture.
Totally. And it's a growing industry, right? So we need to do it at scale, ramp it up, but it's a technology that we are working on and know can work. It just needs to do it at scale. We also have things like carbon sequestration through nature, which is, let's use the word trees. Again, it's always a bit of a tricky kind of topic, but we know they're really a big part of it. The Amazon is a huge part of it, and Brazil with kind of President Lula hopefully will kind of help quite a large part of the world's problem on that. So that's kind of the three buckets. But the thing I wanted to just kind of frame all of this around, which was really important for the development of the 10-point plan, was this is about jobs and investment and bringing down costs for consumers. So decarbonisation is a really important part of it. And in every single, you know, spreadsheet and, you know, whatever we published about it, this is how we keep on track for our carbon targets. But actually, across the various strategies that I wrote in my time in government, we said we're investing about 30 billion of public sector money to leverage about 100 billion of private finance to create around, you know, 500,000 jobs. And I think that's a really important part for, again, to go back to that political and public piece, because this is how people will feel the benefit of it. And this is kind of how it's sustainable. For me, sustainability is meaning that, you know, the man down the end of my road has a job that doesn't just end in 10 years' time because his factory is shutting down because they're no longer making cars, but actually he's going to have a job for life.
Really interesting, perfectly timed as well. I didn't get to ask you if you had a favorite step or some step that was more significant than others, but we'll come back to that. Anouka's going to stay right here with me. The glue is sticking to the chair, and we will be back right after this.